there's this part of us inside that can either go the direction of Nixon, which is, the right sort of character, or you can go the direction of Yoda, which is more attuned, integrated, and has a kindness, while at the same time did not let Luke, we're talking about Star Wars, obviously the original trilogy, but didn't let Luke off the hook, required Luke to go through all of the things that Luke needed to go through in order to get to the other side of that training. And so this is part of that sixth function is not disowning the tough love aspect of ourselves.
Welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
So Antonia, I just saw something on social media that I have never seen before. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I actually saved it on my phone. It's a picture of a set of stairs that are called witch steps. And they don't have how normal stairs have normal steps. Mm-hmm. These have a left and right element to them. So they stagger. So you could kind of walk up in a weird way. Oh,
I saw those. It was supposed to make it so that when witches came to your house that you'd confuse them and they couldn't go up your steps.
They can't go up your steps.
Yeah.
Right. And I thought that was really interesting. And these are mostly found in New England in the United States. I think upstate New York, the Hudson River Valley. Because back, 18th century, there was a lot of old wives' tales that witches were going to come for you, and Sleepy Hollow, that whole I don't know.
Or Salem witch trials.
The Salem witch trials.
Everybody's named Goody.
That's right, Goody. Young Goodman Brown.
That's right.
Nathaniel Hawthorne books and stuff.
Yep.
I don't know. I saw those, and I think it's relevant to what we're talking about today, because we're actually going to talk about the sixth cognitive function in the cognitive function stack of personality.
Yes.
What is that, a mouthful? But I thought I'd start off by talking about these steps. And just like these steps were built to confuse the witches, a lot of times this is the shadow part of us, this witch part of us. John Beebe, we're going to get into the details of this, but he calls it the witch Senex. And I think sometimes we confuse the messages here, or we can be confused by the messages coming from this part of us.
Yeah.
See what I did there? See how I wrapped all that together?
Staggered steps.
Right?
Yeah. Good connection making there.
Shadowy material coming through. We have to sometimes either confuse it, or sometimes it just is confused.
Right. Well, it's also funny to think that a witch would be confused by staggered steps. Right.
I would just get on my broom and go straight up.
Yeah, that's right. Just hop on your broom. What's going on?
I wouldn't even use the steps. I'd be flying around everywhere anyway. I don't know what these witches are doing walking.
Right.
You have a perfectly good broom right there.
That's right. That's the old timey version of those ride up things for steps, right?
Yeah.
That the old folk use.
Maybe that's where they came into.
Yeah.
Into vogue. This is the style at the time.
That's right. But instead of one of those seats, it's just a broom. And right up. So, yes, we will be talking about the sixth function. And in case you are new to type learning how cognitive functions work, we're going to do a 3-part series on this one. So we can explain the theory first and then talk about the practical application depending upon your personality type. But we're not just going to talk about the sixth function. We're going to talk about the sixth function specifically in terms of developing it for career. Yep. And this is something I picked up from our friend, Dr. Dario Nardi. He was mentioning that there's been a bit of a theory that your sixth function is most useful when you're developing it for career purposes. And I thought that was really fascinating. I still am not 100% sure if he came up with that or if he sourced it from somebody else. I will have to ask him in about a week and a half, because we'll be doing our live profiler training event, and he'll be one of our speakers.
Yeah.
And so I'll ask him then if this is something that he came up with. I think he sourced it from somewhere else. I still don't know where. But that said, the more I've thought about it, the more I'm like, no, I think it's right. I think that's actually a pretty solid way of building a good connection with and integrating that part of who we are.
Yeah. So if I was listening right now, I'd want to know, okay, how do I identify what my sixth cognitive function is? So if you listen to Personality Hacker, we've talked about the 8 functions before, but usually we talk about what's called the CAR model. And we talk about your functions in just the first 4 of them, which are technically called ego-syntonic functions. And this is the driver, the co-pilot, 10-year-old, and 3-year-old, also known as the dominant auxiliary, tertiary, or inferior, the technical names in the Myers-Briggs world. And we use that car model to show you how your mind's working, how you make decisions, how you learn information, some of the strong parts of yourself, some of the weaker, more challenging, uncertain parts of the self. And then that co-pilot, also known as the auxiliary, man, that's a translator for you. It helps you translate some of the best parts of yourself with some of the more challenging parts. And it's a part we often emphasize to grow. Mm-hmm. So one of the easiest ways, and we won't go through all the math necessarily right here, because I don't think, unless you really want to, Antonia, I'll give the quick algebra equation.
Okay.
If you look at your co-pilot or auxiliary cognitive function, if you know what that is, and your car model, and by the way, if you go to personalityhacker.com/car model and get more information around this, we also have these in our owner's manuals. Look at the car model, you can identify what your co-pilot or auxiliary cognitive function is. All you have to do is flip the attitude of that function. What do I mean by that? So for example, I have ENFP preferences. My co-pilot or auxiliary cognitive function is authenticity. The technical name is introverted feeling. So for me to find out what my sixth function is, I just have to take that introverted and I make that extroverted. And now my sixth function is extroverted feeling.
Right.
The same thing would follow for you, Antonia.
Yep.
Except you have introverted thinking or accuracy as your co-pilot. So to flip that from introvert to extrovert, that means your sixth function would be extroverted thinking or effectiveness.
Yeah. I think we should, I don't want to go massively down the rabbit's hole of how it all works, but I do want to give a couple patterns that I think help make it a little easier to understand the rest of the theory.
You won't disappoint.
Okay.
I'm sure someone listening is like, yes, awesome. I want to hear the math behind it.
Just a little bit. So there, you mentioned that the car model, or those are called the first four functions or functions 1 through 4. You mentioned that they are ego syntonic. And that's Dr. John Beebe's, that's his terminology. And ego syntonic basically means we identify with them.
Yes.
Because our ego is what we know about ourselves. It's our definition of our personality. And so the first 4 cognitive functions are ones that whether we feel like we're good or not so good at them, we understand how they're part of who we are.
Yeah.
Functions 5 through 8 are what are called ego distonic, meaning that we don't really identify with them and we don't see how they're part of us. And so they are also referred to as shadow functions. The easiest way to understand the shadow is what we are unconscious or unaware of inside of ourselves. So the shadow doesn't have to be this big murky place that's filled with all sorts of bad news. It's just the place where we're not as familiar with who we are in those parts of ourselves. And we've done podcasts on the shadow multiple times. We've done podcasts on the 8-function model multiple times. So if you want to get a deeper dive into it, please feel free to go look up those podcasts.
Yeah, so it's a murky place with good and bad material there. Because it can be challenging, or it could be really good stuff that maybe you're not allowing yourself to see about who you are.
Yeah, or it could be totally neutral. Right,
totally
it's just stuff that you are unaware of yourself.
And when you make it aware, it becomes ego material.
That's right. And the first 4 functions are mirrored by functions 5 through 8 because there are 8 cognitive functions in total. So each personality type has 4 of those 8 functions, those Jungian cognitive functions, the mental processes that help us understand how, understand new information, take it in, process it, perceive it, and then determine its value and worth by judging it and and determining the should of how things should be set up. We have 4 of those 8 Jungian cognitive functions that we identify with. And again, whether we think we're strong or weak at them, it doesn't matter. They're still kind of part of how we see ourselves. Functions 5 through 8 are the functions that we don't, but they are still inside of us. And that's the important thing to remember is that we still have access to them and they're still operating in our life. They're still influencing us and we're influencing them. And whenever we do quote unquote shadow work, if you are a type enthusiast, now people do shadow work that know nothing about type. You can do shadow work no matter what your access tool is. But in the world of Jungian functions and Myers-Briggs personality, what's convenient is that those 4 functions that are ego dystonic or functions that we are not identifying with make really nice on-ramps to parts of ourselves that we would otherwise never identify, and we would do what's called disown, which is push away and not look at and not acknowledge as a part of who we are. So as you mentioned, when we talk about the 6th function, Basically, the way that the algorithm works is you take all four of those first functions, the first four functions that we're identifying with, and then functions 5 through 8, as you just mentioned, mirror them, but they point the opposite direction. So for me, my first function is extroverted intuition. We call it exploration. So my fifth function would be introverted intuition, or what we call perspectives. It's still intuition. It's still the strongest part of me, but it's pointed the opposite direction and all the way down. So as you mentioned, that sixth function then, if you follow that same algorithmic formula, the sixth function would be a mirror of the second. Now, the reason why this is important is we are taking this model from Dr. John Beebe's 8-function model. And in his 8-function model, he doesn't just talk about the order of functions 1 through 8, but he assigns to each of them an archetypal energy or an archetype that lives inside of us that has that function as its favorite tool. So that's important to understand, that it's not a one-to-one correlation. It's not that this function can only ever be used with this archetypal energy, or that this archetypal energy inside of us is only ever uses this tool, but there is a strong relationship between the two. And so the relevant piece there is when we talk about the sixth function, we're going to talk about it in depth using the archetypal energy that Dr. John Beebe has ascribed to it, or says that has the archetype that has a relationship to it.
Yeah.
The fact that it's a shadow version of the second function is also relevant, because then we can compare contrast a little bit to how are we using our second function. And that's one of the reasons why the sixth function operates the way that it does, is because it's kind of like the second function, only the parts of ourselves that we don't really want to see as much.
Yeah. We work with Dr. John Beebe on a monthly basis. We actually consult with him. He's one of our direct coaches and mentors, because we want to go directly to the source and talk to John directly. And so we've been talking to him almost for 4 years now.
Yeah.
At the time of this recording, and we have no desire to stop, because we end up on these long sessions with him, and they're fantastic. I think they're really, really wonderful sessions.
Well, and I remember somebody recently on a comment said that we came to John's model late. Like you guys started talking about John Beebe's archetypes late. And I thought that was interesting, because the first time I heard about John's model was like 2009, right? It was like, it's been 15 years ago now. But we didn't really talk about it until we started mentoring with him. Like, he became our mentor and coach, because I didn't want to talk about it wrong. I wanted to make sure that I understood what he meant by the model before I started presenting it, or we started presenting it in a podcast.
Yeah.
So we kind of came to it, quote unquote, late, in the sense that we didn't talk about it. But once we did start talking about it, I feel pretty confident when we do that we're honoring how John wants it to be discussed.
And when we started our Personality Life Path mentorship, where we do 8 weeks going through all 8 functions, including the shadow functions, we didn't know if that was going to work fully. Like, we had a pretty good idea it was many years ago when we started this. And now that we've been doing coaching with that, and we've run multiple classes through, we understand the true power of this. We're like, oh, people can handle this. We thought, well, maybe people can't handle more than just the first 4 functions, that car model.
Yeah.
Maybe they won't be able to understand it. Maybe it'll be overwhelming for our clients. Maybe it'll be overwhelming for our content. But we've realized that as long as we can make sure there's access points, I think people can get this. Now, you mentioned something, and I'm just going to jump in here, and we can always backtrack. But you mentioned, this is very important, the 6th function we're going to talk about today. Again, John associates which Senex energy to it. We can unpack why that is. But if it's the shadow of the co-pilot, we've talked for years, that auxiliary function, the second function, we've talked for years about how important that is for personal growth, that second function, that co-pilot. It's that translator I mentioned earlier that helps some of the best parts of you deal with and support some of the more uncertain and less certain and less sophisticated parts of you. And so it's really critical. And because the 6th function is its shadow, it has a lot of the same energy, but a little bit of a different quality of that energy. And that's why it's so useful in things like career or business, especially when you're making resource or you're trying to accomplish something. It could be very powerful to round out the energy of your co-pilot, which gets you started on the growth journey of personality type.
Yep. Yeah. So one other factor to add into here, and if you want us to spend a little bit of time on this concept, we did this in the self-love series.
Yeah.
When we talked about each personality and how they can show themselves and receive love from themselves.
We have one episode for every single type in that series.
Yeah, and it's pretty recent. We did them this year, so they should be relatively recent podcasts. That the second, and for the purposes of this particular episode, we'll just keep it simple. But the second and third functions, auxiliary and tertiary, are in our car model what we call the co-pilot and the 10-year-old. Those are part of what John calls the axis of relating to others. And what that means is we instinctively use those functions when we're interacting with other people. So the second function, the auxiliary or co-pilot, John ascribes a parental archetypal energy to it. And it makes sense that a parental energy would be part of our axis of relating to others, because parents, by definition, do not have the role of being a parent unless they're parenting somebody else. So that makes sense, right? It's part of our relating to other people. If you bring that same concept down to functions 5 through 8, and then see the relationship or the similarities between the second and the sixth function, which again will be the same function, just pointed in a different direction. So for you, like you said, it's feeling. Your second function is introverted feeling or authenticity, and your sixth function is extroverted feeling or harmony. It's still feeling. It's just going, it's doing it a little different than how you normally would be doing it. If we bring that same concept down from the second function to the sixth, then we could say the sixth, and by extension, the seventh as well. But the sixth function is also the axis of relating to others. So our sixth function, we're also using instinctively in our relationships to the outside world. We're talking about how we can use it to develop this function in terms of career. And it makes sense that because it is a part of our axis of relating to others, it would be part of our interfacing with the outside world. And that's important to remember because we're already instinctively using it that way.
Yeah.
Right. We're already, whether we're aware of it or not. And most of the time we're not aware of it because it's in our shadow. Right. And so let's also remember what the premise is. The premise is that this is a part of us. This sixth function is a part of us that we're really not that consciously aware of how and when we're using it, how it's showing up for us. But it is activated. It is often activated in relationships to other people, and it's often activated instinctively in terms of career. So all of that groundwork, all of that theoretical groundwork is laid to say, we're going to be talking about a part of ourselves that is already operational. It's already happening. It's already probably happening in career. It's already happening in our relationships with other people. Now, let's try to see how it's operational or operating for us as individuals in order to integrate it. And integration is simply a Jungian term to say, let's make that less unconscious. Let's make this less of a shadow piece of information. Let's bring it up into our awareness and then go, oh yeah, that is how I'm using it, isn't it? Or that is operating inside of me. And then bring that awareness in. That's called integration, taking a part that we are not aware of, maybe even disowning. Yeah. Disowning means pushing it away. And anytime it's reflected back to us, we go, yeah, that's not what's going on, even though it's reflected back that is what's going on. Instead of letting it kind of happen to us, let's take a little bit of power and control over this. Bring it in, own it, right? Integrate it and see if it can't help us out.
Yeah.
As opposed to operating in a way that's kind of shadowy, pulling strings from, like the sort of the underworld.
Yeah.
And then having it happen to us in a way that's not optimal.
We were in Seattle for our last personality profiler training event that we did on the West Coast because people have been begging us to come to the West Coast. So we did. And
you're welcome. We finally made
it. my friend Joel, INFJ Joel, lives out there, and we hung out with him because we were in the area. And I said, "Hey man, I need to get you." And I started to talk to him about maybe helping us with some of the card decks because he's a graphic designer. He's got some design skills. So some of the personality card decks I want to develop around archetypes and some other things that we're building. And I was like, "And can you get involved?" And I'm talking to him. He goes, "Joel, hold it." He pushes back on me a little bit. He's like, "Man, you are a recruiter. You just recruit people like crazy. You recruit." And he's known me for a long time. He's like, "You've always been a recruiter." I'm like, I really like that identity. I think I am a recruiter. I really do recruit a lot of people. And I realized, reflecting on that, I think that's my sixth function of extroverted feeling or harmony, that likes to recruit people to like get the coalition to come in. It's the part of me. I never really, like, how does your sixth function come up? It's shadow material. So what's it doing for me? If it's operational, like you say, well, part of it is paying attention. How is it operating? What is it doing? Where are you seeing it already show up in your life? And obviously in my career and our business and the things we do with Personality Hacker, I do tend to recruit people. I almost just want to get them on the team. And sometimes I don't even have a plan for people. I'm just like, get on the team. Let's just do it. And I've had to really throttle this. It's unconscious, right? Just getting more people together is going to help it for some reason.
Yeah.
So that's one way that I've just kind of identified that extroverted feeling or harmony, which is the opposite attitude of my co-pilot as an ENFP with ENFP preferences. That extroverted feeling harmony is trying to gather and create coalition and bring people together for consensus.
Yeah.
I thought, okay, well, how is it gumming me up in the shadow of it all? Well, I've also noticed just in the last week or two, some of our team members are like, they're not dipping in productivity, but they're like dipping in like some of their attunement. And I'm like, what's going on? I kind of lamented to you, like, what's happening? You said, well, you have to check in with people on a really frequent basis. I'm like, what? Why? And you're like, because they need to hear from you and have like, but I've already given the assignment. They know the intent of what we're trying to do. They know the objectives. Like, I wouldn't want to be bothered. I'd want to get to work and just do it. And you're like, no, Joel, people need to have more touch points. They need to be connected, not just encouraged or supported or given a vision.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, I'm like pushing back on this idea. But then if I sit with myself for a moment, I go, actually, she's probably right. In my career, in my business, of course I need to connect with people and make more connections with them. Of course I need to bring some extroverted feeling or harmony in here. Of course that's what's needed from our team. It's not enough to just recruit everybody, get them on the team. I need to also have personal touch points, not just like business operational touch points, but these personal moments of connection. So as I'm looking at my sixth function, I've had a sense of how I've already been using it. And now I'm starting to see some of the shadow of where maybe I didn't like the parts that I need to start to use and I've been pushing them away, or I have some availability to bring some of that into my life. And those are just two very simple examples. There's tons more for me to explore.
Yeah.
So as you're listening along, if you identify what your sixth function is as we talk, be thinking about, how am I already using this in my life? Where are some ways that it's showing up thematically? And where are some things I'm blind to? Like, what am I not seeing? Or what's some opportunity that I have for this?
Yeah. Yeah. It's really easy for me to see it because my sixth function is extroverted thinking or effectiveness, which we already think of that as the business function, right?
Yeah.
Getting things done, projects and that sort of thing. So it's a little easier for me to theoretically understand how it would be optimized or optimal for me to bring in more of in a business or career context. But all the other functions, it's taken me a little while to see it show up. I've had to observe and study clients and figure out how it's showing up for everybody. So in this particular episode, we're just going to lay the track of the theory. In the next two episodes, we'll talk about specific functions as a sixth function.
Let's do it.
And we usually start with perceiving functions. So we'll start with the EJs and the IPs and talk about how their sixth function can help them career. And then we'll talk about the judging functions, the EPs and the IJs. But it's good to identify that first, and you probably will have some confusion around it, unless you're an ETP like me. And it's like, oh yeah, I could totally see how that's necessary. But most of the other types have a little bit of confusion around how their sixth function is going to help them out. And I think, like you said, just taking a minute to identify it and ask, how is it showing up? So let's hit some beats of to round this theory out, to sort of keep it high level on a 20,000 foot view. Talk about why it works the way that it does. Like, why would the sixth function even be advantageous in a career in a career context?
Yeah.
And then after we land the theory, then we'll move on to the next episodes and talk about specifics.
I think one of my superpowers is not giving accurate information and screwing things up so people can understand stuff. Does that make sense? We call it the Witt Senex, but one thing I like to do, this is a bastardization of how to think about it, but it just puts a little mental framework in my head just so I can latch other content onto it. So what I'm about to say is not accurate.
Okay.
But I think it's helpful. If the co-pilot is parental energy, I like to see the sixth function as grandparent energy in my own life.
Yeah.
Like, it's not parental, but it's like grandparent. It's like the next level beyond the parental. And there's a different quality to grandparent energy than parental energy. And so I just kind of have that quick little framework in my head as we talk about the other qualities. It's just a nice little framework that I have that helps me personally keep it simple and in order in my own mind, even if it's inaccurate.
Yeah, I could see that being the case because you mentioned it offhandedly a couple times, but I want to land it a little stronger. So the archetypal energy that's associated, excuse me, with the sixth function is the witch/Senex. So what is a witch or a Senex? Well, they're people who are on the peripheral of society that are usually associated with some kind of arcane knowledge. Senex in particular is usually associated with wisdom, but which could also be another name for hag or for crone. And crone particularly refers to a wise older woman. So the witch or Senex is given this attribute, this archetypal energetic attribute of older and wiser. So I think grandparent isn't inappropriate. I think that makes a lot of sense. But not necessarily the grandparent that's baking you cookies every time you come over or hanging a sign that says grandchildren spoiled here or whatever.
Yes.
Like, it's not necessarily that kind of grandparent. It's more like the elder in the tribe kind of grandparent.
Yeah.
It's got more of an energy of wisdom and a lot of other like wisdom and arcane knowledge at the same time.
Yeah. Well, and John really characterizes as a withering authority. Like, it's an authority that you can tell it's not going to have much longer to be like being able to speak its authority. He uses the example of Richard Nixon at the end of Richard Nixon's presidency. This kind of like, he knows he's on his way out. He's been caught with Watergate and all of this. And he's like, but we just have to. And he's like he was trying to get drugs outlawed and make all these, get the hippies and all the minorities and like take care of this and just blah, 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 this blah, 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 withering authority and kind of like angsty.
Yeah.
He talks about that as kind of the character, this like blustery, blah, 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 old man energy. And there's, I think, that qualitative nature to it.
Yes. And that's one of the reasons why it's important not to just attribute an archetypal energy to this, but also to recognize that it's different when we are unaware of it.
Yeah.
So there is the integrated version of this, and then there's the disowned version of it. The integrated version, meaning that if you are aware that you carry this archetypal energy and you have owned it, meaning that there is a part of you that wants to shake an angry fist at young people and tell them to get off your lawn. There is in everybody, just like there's an eternal child energy in everybody. There's this like angry old person who just can't be bothered and just, says things in movies like, I'm too old for this, right?
Yeah.
There's that part in everyone. And if we disown it because we don't want to lose our cool, or we don't want to lose our young hip vibe, if we don't want to see ourselves as somebody who, is irrelevant, that's the part, this archetypal energy. It's relevant, but it's not relevant because it's cool. It's relevant because it's the final person you ask for wisdom when, all the stuff is hitting the fan, right?
Yeah.
It's the person you go to in the middle, in the stories. It's like Yoda. It's the character you visit when you need to go get concentrated wisdom. But Yoda is a beloved character, not because Yoda was like young, hip, and cool and was the hero throughout the entire story. Yoda is beloved because Yoda was eccentric and lived in the middle of a bog and was 800 years old and knew everything about the Force.
And to the point, he is withering.
Yes.
Right?
Like literally withering, as in like the body is withering.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So there's this part of us inside that can either go the direction of Nixon, which is, the right sort of character, or you can go the direction of Yoda, which is more attuned, integrated, and has a kindness while at the same time did not let Luke, we're talking about Star Wars, obviously the original trilogy, but didn't let Luke off the hook, required Luke to go through all of the things that Luke needed to go through in order to get to the other side of that training. And so this is part of that sixth function is not disowning the tough love aspect of ourselves. If it's the shadow version of the parent, what's great about that parental energy, and we've talked about this endlessly in other podcasts, the parental energy is there to have us step up, take responsibility, own what we need to own, show up almost endlessly giving to others, and so we have to understand our boundary setting, but it's like a nurturing part that's also responsible. And we have to have a parental time period in our life. Otherwise we never grow up, right? We stay eternal children forever. So that's an important part of who we are. This is the quote unquote shadow version of that. So it's the part of us that we don't want to see about our parenting. It's the part that snaps at our kids when we're just kind of done. It's the part that lays down the law. And so because of that, it's also very attuned to boundary setting, and it's attuned to nuance, and it's attuned to making sure that people don't get away with things. It's a part that understands sort of why we have to step up, and it's willing to do whatever it takes. And in that way, that's why it's a good energy for career. Career needs boundary setting. It needs us to understand why things are set up the way that they have to be set up. It's a not idealistic part, right? In fact, it's kind of the opposite of idealistic. It takes life as it is, and it understands things with a wizened perspective because it's been around for a long time. And it infuses some of those values into whatever it's doing. And career arguably is the one place where we kind of need to not put up with any bullshit. And the more we'll put up with in our careers, usually the more we lose. Like it's the part of us that doesn't fear asking for a raise. It's the part of us that when we are responsible as a team lead or as a manager, doesn't put up with our, the people who are working for us goofing off and messing around. It's the part of us that realizes that results matter, that we're not just here to clock in, clock out, and get a paycheck, that we actually have to lay down some groundwork and get things done. And if we don't, well, then we're all in trouble. It's the part that will make sure that others are stepping up, and it'll make sure that we're stepping up as well.
So one of the things I want to pivot over to at this point is to talk a little bit about basically the integration of this part of ourselves, the sixth function integration. This is a shadow part. And we can apply it maybe topically to a couple different areas of what it can do for us. When we talk about the sixth function, remember this is the shadow. And anytime we're talking about shadow, integration means to recognize and own something. Often with shadow material, we don't like to see it. We like to push it away. And we've talked about this in other episodes, that when you are triggered, somebody says something and it triggers you, well, that's probably shadow material making itself known. And what do most of us do when we're triggered? We're like, oh, that's that person's fault. And we project it outward, and we do not own it, see it, or recognize it about the self. So the first step here is to, when this is reflected to us, the shadow material of our any of our shadow material, but particularly the six functions we're talking about today, I want to see it. I want to say, that is me. That's not the other. That's not something else. That is coming from me. It is in my shadow. Okay, what do I do with this now? And I think that's really important to not push this away. And the other comment I also want to make here too is that when we asked you to identify your sixth cognitive function for your specific personality, your sixth cognitive function is not which Senex energy. It is its function operating. You have the archetypical energy of which Senex, this kind of energy inside of you archetypically. When that archetypical energy is activated, it tends to pull qualitatively on the sixth cognitive function.
Yeah.
But not always.
Right.
And those aren't the same thing.
Yeah.
But they alchemically create something when they come together. I think that's very important. We do a lot of work in our personality life path on this because it's something that can really confuse people. And so this could be murky territory. Let's take that framework of the distinction between somebody that has kind of been blind to the sixth function, they will not integrate it, versus integrate it. And then let's look at that, the opposing of that there, and let's apply it to some things. So let's take it, for example, like let's take the subject of boundaries, because we talked about.
Can I make a comment, by the way?
Yes, please do.
Based on what you just said?
Please do.
Okay. Before we get into specifics, I do want to make one more theoretical comment on top of that.
Yes.
That it's not something, like you said, the archetypal energy of the witch and the Senex is it's not the exact same thing as your sixth function. That's really important. Sometimes this gets really confusing because we have a tendency to talk about them similarly. Yes. And the reason why we're talking about witch Senex energy and kind of describing it and explaining it is it flavors the function, and the function flavors the energy. So they have a relationship, almost like a symbiotic relationship. And the reason why you're making that distinction is because we can also use witch Senex energy or have that part of us come up, and it has nothing to do with our sixth function. Yes. We can apply it to other functions as well. And we can also use our sixth function and have it have nothing to do with witch Senex energy. So it's important, like you said, to create a distinction between them. Yeah. But they influence each other very frequently, very commonly. And the more unintegrated it is, like the more we are unaware of it, the more likely it's to come up in our awareness or our conscious awareness with that archetypal energy. Because the archetype is actually the thing that's being called up. That's actually life has asked of us something that part of us goes, oh, now it's my job to come out. And so when that part of us comes out, sometimes people call it a critical parent. I think witch Senex is still better. But that part of us, when the world treats us a certain way and we think we have to fight back, and that's the part that comes out, it tends to grab the sixth function as its favorite tool. Yes. And that's why we talk about them almost as if they're the same thing, but they aren't.
So when we're about to talk about applying this, then we're going to do it generally from the archetypical energy standpoint. Mm-hmm. Your individual personality type, again, will influence the qualitative nature of this, like the flavor it shows up as. But we're going to talk it as it's just its archetypical energy. And then in the next couple episodes, we'll apply it to specific functions to show how alchemically they come together to create something.
That's right. And one more track I want to lay is that you're using your sixth function or it's influencing you. And that witch/Senex energy is also influencing you, whether you're aware of it or not. Yeah. So when we talk about developing it for career or integrating it and using it in career, we're not saying use this part of yourself that never gets used ever. We're saying be aware of how you're using it. Be aware of how it's influencing you. Because when you are unaware, that's when it takes from you. That's when the unconscious has a tendency to not be showing up in your best interest. But when you integrate it, when you're aware of it and you observe it and you own it and you do your best to influence how it's showing up, that's when it actually gives rewards. Yeah. So that's what we mean by integration, or using it for career. You already are actually. That's the most likely thing is that you already have a relationship with this function in a lot of different areas of life, but particularly your career, you already do. But it might actually be undermining you. It might be doing bad things for you. Integration and being aware of it and shining a light on it means that you can switch that to, instead of it taking from you and maybe undermining you, instead supporting you and doing good things and giving you rewards for bringing it in.
Yeah. So let's just apply this. There's the 4 qualities, and there's more, but these are just 4 we're going to choose to do this right now. Mm-hmm. Boundaries, critical eye, because this witch Senex energy can be a critical eye. High standards and accountability. Let's talk through these. Okay. So again, the framework is integrated. This part of you is integrated versus non-integrated. You're not seeing it or you're pushing it away. Yeah. If we talk about boundaries, so we're talking about the sixth function in relation to boundaries, whether we push the sixth function away or we've integrated it, what is the way we can look at this in our own lives? Like, how do we see this? Kind of that framework again, the integration versus pushing it away when it comes to boundaries specifically.
Yeah. So the archetypal energy of this witch/Senex energy, and Senex basically just means a male witch, right? We're usually more aware. I guess I should have said that at the beginning of the podcast, but a Senex is effectively a male witch. So it's the same energy. And this is a part of us that understands and respects boundaries. Our parental function doesn't always respect boundaries. It's sometimes with a parent, you have to learn how to set boundaries, and it takes a while, right? It's like you kind of want to give your kids everything. And if you don't set boundaries, you go, oh, that's actually, I'm spoiling my kid, or it's actually turning out bad, so maybe I should do so. This is the part of us that instinctively understands the importance of boundaries. It's like, no, I'm not going to do that. You're not going to do that. That's not allowed. That's not permitted. And that's a good thing. Boundary setting is really important. And in career, it's really important because it knows where to draw a line. If we don't know how to draw a line in career, then we will we'll get overworked. We'll spend more time working than spending time with our family, right? Or we won't know when somebody's taking advantage of us, or we won't stick up for ourselves, which you have to do in a career context.
Remember that whole thing back like 15 years ago, maybe even 10 years ago, it was like, hey, come work and write some blog posts for my business. People would say, and like, you get a lot of experience.
Yeah.
This energy, right. Like setting boundaries around that kind of thing. This would really helped a lot of people during that time, that freelancer time when it was like, no, you'll get the experience. We don't need to pay you.
Right.
The experience is worth way more than money.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And so
the which Senex would say, actually, I need some cash.
Yeah, I'm going to need to get paid. Right. Or I'm going to need to understand how this is actually like definitely helping my career trajectory or career capital. Like exposure is not enough. Like what's the next phase? So understanding boundary setting is really important in career, because otherwise you will get taken advantage of. It's also a way for us to recognize our own excesses and what we're asking of other people that isn't appropriate. So recognizing where a boundary goes in career is crucial. On the other side, though, if we don't do that, if we set too harsh boundaries, right, and we're the ones who are doing it, we might be exploiting others, which we don't want to do. Or we might be rigid around change. We might not be okay with new ideas. We might have not just created a boundary, but almost kind of isolated ourselves. And if we do that, then we're not open to new ideas or new opportunities or working with new people. So that the integrated version, when we're aware of how this is showing up for us, how it's influencing us, we can watch ourselves, make sure that the boundaries are flexible, but also that they're not going to, boundaries shouldn't be flexible, but how we're operating around them and not creating too harsh a boundary, but also not creating too flexible a boundary. It helps us set it like the Goldilocks. We set it just right. And that's the integrated version. If we don't integrate it, if we keep it disowned, this is the part of us that doesn't know how to do that. Yeah. Right. And I've never seen anybody, this is kind of the weird thing. If we feel like we're getting taken advantage of in business, we are probably taking advantage of others in business without us recognizing it. That's the crazy thing. The crazy thing about our shadow material and our unconscious is almost always when we are blaming outward for something, we're unaware of how we are doing it ourselves. And that's why we have to own it first. We have to first recognize how we are also exploiting. And once we do that, then we can go, oh, that's probably why I'm being exploited, because I don't understand where the line is.
So what I hear you saying then is if someone is struggling with boundaries, I think this is what you're saying, and particularly at work, in a career environment, maybe they're infringing on other people's boundaries without knowing it. Maybe it's shadow material to say, oh, am I stepping over the line and I'm not honoring other people's like borders, boundaries, requirements, and I'm just infringing upon that. I mean, I don't think you're saying that's 100% of the time, but you're basically saying that's a good question to ask yourself. If you're struggling with boundaries, people seem to always infringe on yours. Well, and what probably the person wouldn't couch it as that. It probably isn't like I'm really infringing on other people's boundaries. What it probably is you don't have clear definition.
Yes.
And so you're not really stepping across a boundary. It's the definition's not there. So you're not really aware that maybe you are.
Right.
Maybe
exactly.
It's like unconscious, or you've left it a little more loose, or you just don't have you don't have that definition.
And when you do it, I'm not the kind of person who would ever do that. So if somebody accuses you of it, you're just not going to own it, because you're like, no, I'm the person who gets my boundaries stepped on. I'm not the person who steps on boundaries. So like you said, the definition isn't there. It's too loosey-goosey. So when you are doing it, you're just not going to be aware of it.
Yeah.
And the person might never tell you. So you might like just truly never be aware of how you are actually infringing on others.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So this idea of our sixth function, again, when it comes to career with boundaries, integrate, anything else to talk about boundaries before we move on to the next part?
Well, it's just good to remember that if you are unaware of how your sixth function relates to boundaries, then it's probably, again, taking from you.
Yeah.
And if you bring it in and integrate this part of you and use it particularly in boundary setting with career, it's a leverage point. You'll find yourself being in a much better situation.
Yeah. Okay. Let's apply this sixth function, archetypical energy, to the idea that, I mean, it's good at a critical eye. It can pick out things critically.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to use the word calibration when we think about critical things. Like being critical is to pick apart the things that could be bettered or made better, calibrated to be better. I think that's a good way to see it. Now, that's the intent is calibration, but when things dip over into just nitpicking and
right.
It becomes critical.
Right.
But the intent behind criticism is calibration. You're trying to make something better or improve it or ameliorate into something else.
Yep.
So when we talk about this sixth cognitive function, having Witt Senex energy, applied to this idea of having a critical eye for things, what does that look like qualitatively? And how do we, when we push out away that function and we don't integrate it versus we bring it in and integrate it, what's the difference there?
Yeah. So a critical eye is really good for exposing weaknesses, inconsistencies, falsehoods, right? Anything that's like untrue. It's really good for assessment and making sure that there's quality control, particularly if you have an analytic job or a particularly analytical job. It's good in like risk assessment, and it's good when you're sizing somebody up on the other side of a table and trying to kind of figure out who you're working with here. Is this a good person to be in a career relationship with? So a critical eye is it's important to have, actually. The challenge, as you mentioned, is if we don't have balance in it and it's operating inside of us without us recognizing or realizing it, we can get pretty harsh. We can become really judgmental. And that includes not just with other people, but also on ourselves.
Yeah.
And so it can, instead of being supportive in, as mentioned, in sort of analytically looking at a situation, sizing something up, determining whether or not that's, that this is a good deal, or this is the right person to work with, or this is a good career step, or whatever. As opposed to supporting us, it can become very undermining.
Yeah. I think I had a moment of this just a couple of weeks ago. Actually, you reflect this. You're like, I think that's your Witt Senex energy, Joel. Qualitatively flavored by what mine would be as an ENFP, extroverted feeling or harmony. We're at the local Starbucks here in town, and we're standing in Starbucks in line, and we had already ordered our drinks, you and I, because we were out like having like a business talk or whatever. We got drinks to, coffee to sit down and have a conversation. And there's a gentleman there, and there's like two very young workers, probably teenagers, working behind the counter. And you could tell they're new and they're young, and they don't, this probably is their after school job or something.
Right.
And they're very new, and they're uncertain of what's going on. And this gentleman didn't fully speak English. He had English as a second language. He's trying to communicate something about the drink. They got the order wrong, and they didn't know what to do. And they were kind of like struggling. And I look over and I see the manager over at another table with like 2 or 3 other employees talking to them about something, like having a meeting. And they were kind of like distracted. They could see, the manager could see what was happening, and the 2 workers were having a tough time. And I'm thinking, and it's like everything's kind of breaking down and falling apart, and they can't get this service. And I just walk over to the manager table like, hey, are you the manager here? She's like, yeah. I'm like, they need some help behind the counter. This gentleman over here doesn't speak fully English. They're confused. They need you to step up and come over here and help them, because it's all going to crap back here, basically. And she's like, well, I'm in the middle of a job interview and blah, 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 blah. And she like starts getting on my case.
Right.
I'm like, okay, I'm just letting you know they need some help. And I think it's like kind of a situation where it's going to escalate if somebody doesn't handle it. And I'm like kind of stepping in here. And then I came back, and she got up in a few minutes and went over and took care of it. But you were like, whoa, that was really forward, Joel. Like I kind of just took over the situation. And I was even surprised that I did something like that. I was like, whoa, where did that come from? But it was like this withering authority that came up, this witch Senex energy that was like, somebody needs to do something about this situation.
Right. There are needs going unmet.
Like, these people, this is not happening. This person needs help. And the people behind here need help. And I remember thinking, wow, that is really interesting. It almost happened to me unconsciously. I didn't really seek this out. I don't typically do things like that in public, especially. I mean, I'm very boisterous in public and I'm very friendly with people, but I don't try to correct things in public.
Yeah.
But I think that was a critical eye moment of that witch Senex energy in me trying to handle the situation on behalf of the customer and the people behind the counter and the whole restaurant, the whole situation of this facility or this coffee shop.
Yep. Yeah.
Anyway, I think that's a good example.
I think that's an
example, at least.
That's a great example. I'm so glad you remembered it because it goes to the next point, which is high standards.
Yes. So we talk about the sixth function with high standards. Again, witch Senex energy applied to like these benchmarks, very high benchmarks, our sixth cognitive function associated with this energy. Would you say it's relentless? Does it like put pressure on us? Like when it has these high standards, are the irresponsible standards? Can we meet them? Are they like out of reach standards or they're just high standards?
Well, that is the distinction between when it's integrated versus when it is unintegrated or disowned. So the high standards is a push for excellence, which is good. And particularly in a career, that's the place where we like pursuing excellence in a career is actually very psychologically rewarding. Actually, I recently watched a movie. It's just like a fun sort of Sandra Bullock vehicle called Lost City. It was made a couple years ago. And it introduced a Latin term that was dulcius ex asperis. And I wrote it down because I thought it was, I've been on this thing about like earned rewards, right? Earned dopamine, earned rewards. And the Latin dulcius ex asperis.
It sounds like Latin for kiss my butt.
Yeah. Dulcius ex asperis.
It was like I'm going to start telling people I like.
I wish there was a Latin phrase for that. That would be awesome.
I'm sure there is. Somebody in the comments can leave us.
Kiss my butt. No, this means sweeter after difficulties. And when we hold ourselves to a high standard of excellence, that creates difficulty, right? We have to push through. We have to, step up. We have to challenge. You got it. It's tough. And that's what makes it sweet. So there's a lot of psychological, I would even argue spiritual reward in having high standards and excellence in our work. And it kind of doesn't matter if we're doing it for ourselves, if we're doing it for the spiritual and psychological reason, it kind of doesn't matter if we're appreciated in the outside world.
Yeah.
Now, it does ultimately because of pay and because you don't want to like give your life over to somebody who, or like to a company that, is frustrating your attempts to show excellence. You do need a context where they are receiving the excellence that you've given. But there's no reason to like throw up your hands and go like, well, I'm never going to try at a job again, because that actually only hurts us.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to be said for excellence.
Would you say this part of us is not the part that quiet quits?
It is not the part that quiet quits. That's right.
This is not the quiet quitting part of us, the sixth function, which Senex energy.
But it is, you just mentioned, does it put pressure on us? And the answer is absolutely, particularly if it's disowned.
Yeah.
So this is what creates perfectionism. So if we're not careful, now there's other things that also create perfectionism. So if you're a perfectionist, don't be like, oh, it's my sixth function, that's why. No, there's plenty of other systems and nodes in the system of perfectionism.
This could be another avenue to perfectionism. Yet another one.
That's right. If you've knocked down all the others and you're like, why am I still a perfectionist? It might be that your sixth function is trying to encourage you towards excellence, but you have disowned that, and now it's a bit of a tyrant. So the key is with integration is to listen to these parts of you, to listen to your sixth function without being dominated by it. That's really the sweet spot. The sweet spot is to listen to it and go, I need to set good boundaries. I need to have a critical eye. I need to, and to assess things well. I need to have a sense of excellence. Listen to that part without handing too much power over to it, without being dominated by it. And that's the integrated part.
Let's talk about accountability. And accountability in relation, again, to the sixth function, which Senex energy. We talk about this part of us, the archetypical nature, whether it's integrated or pushed away. But this archetype can help us stay accountable. It can help with accountability. It's got that authoritative or authority nature to it to kind of hold us to account, to say, are you getting this done? Are you doing what you said you're going to do? Now, again, that's if you're integrating it and looking at it, but we can also push this away. So let's qualitatively talk about some of the gifts it can give us if we're willing to integrate it, but some of the ways it can challenge us too.
Yeah. So accountability means that we're going to show up to things with more rigor and more integrity. So this is the part of us that encourages us in when we're integrating it, particularly for career, to have integrity in our work and to make sure that we're seeing it through. I mean, how many people do I know? And I was one of them for a really long time before we started a business, and now I can't do this. But for a long time, it was like my job was to just show up, clock in, clock out, do whatever the tasks of the day were, and to be done with it. And I never...
It sounds so nice.
It does now. Now that I'm a business owner, I'm like, wow, that's
like all the stress of like where you're going to get the next, like how you're going to make the money and all the business stuff. Like how you get, and the employee quits here and then this person wants to work with, it's like all that just gone. You just go to a job.
I fantasize about data entry now.
Good day job.
I'm like, just copy paste. I could do that with a little Starbucks next to me. Just
hey, I can do that now. So you got to think of higher things. Copy paste days are done.
Maybe I'll just
never coming back.
Shred papers for like a legal firm or something. Just like whatever allows me to do something with my brain shut off. But that's because I might have a little too much of this. But this is the part of us that encourages us to not just show up and do tasks, but to understand how whatever we're doing, even if it is task-based, even if it is copy-paste or whatever, that is associated with an end result. And the deliverable or the end result, whether you're totally responsible for it, like you are if you own a business, or whether you're just a part of a bigger piece, right? A part of a team that is going into this. It's to remember, like, to not detether your efforts from the result. And when we do that, again, that does create some dysthymia, right? We do get kind of, like in the same way that if we don't show excellence, if we don't understand that there is that the result is associated with our efforts, that's also pretty demoralizing.
I blame the stupidity of the education system for this.
Yeah,
they just teach everything in these silos, and you're like I'm like homeschooling Piper. I'm like, why do they teach it this way? It's not connected to anything real,
right?
And so no wonder kids don't want to learn,
right?
And no wonder when we go to our jobs they feel hollow because there's no results connected to the things we're doing. They're just like theory. Actions we do or concept, theoretical theory, or information.
Yeah, that's right. But when we bring those two things back together and recognize that our efforts are going into a bigger picture, then we want to show integrity. We want to be accountable. We want to show up because we know that those results are in part influenced by us.
Yeah. So
that's when we integrate this part, when we listen to it without being dominated by it, then we feel sort of that sense of like I'm doing something real, right? I'm part of something. I'm having an effect or an impact in my world. Even if it's small, I still have an impact and an effect. If we don't integrate this part and it dominates us, then it oftentimes creates a lot of blame. Now that could be blame. We're blaming ourselves. Anytime something goes wrong, it's sort of associated with that perfectionism thing as well. Being overly critical. If we're not, if things aren't going well, we can either start blaming ourselves, but it's far more likely we start blaming outward because again, this is the axis of relating to others, right? This is part of our relationship to the outside world. So part of being triggered by this is blaming everybody else for results that didn't turn out. Being really upset with everyone else that, it didn't, this is not, that I'm not getting the results I want. And so it can, that's the dark side of it, or maybe even taking on too much accountability, thinking that you influence everything, that if anything goes wrong, that it's your fault. That's another way that it can go dark as well.
So before we wrap up this entire episode, let's let's mention anything else we want to mention around the qualitative nature of the sixth function, which Senex sixth function.
Yeah.
And again, when I say sixth function, I mean the position, the archetypal energy position of that function. And we pair it with your personality type, you listening, that will give you the actual qualitative nature of this.
Yeah.
So we're talking about the archetype though.
Well, and on a high level, as opposed to being like, this is how it rewards you. Here, this is if you integrate it, here's how it punishes you if you don't. But just like some of the things that come along with integrating your shadow at all is that there is increased wisdom. Like you mentioned earlier, one of the ways that we recommend people do quote unquote shadow work is you watch for all your triggers. Disowning means you get triggered and you blame everybody around you. Integrating means that you get triggered and you ask yourself what about yourself is being, sort of revealed in this interaction. And so anytime we are integrating and developing one of our shadow functions, we gain the wisdom of owning our stuff, like just in general. So that's nice, right? It's nice that it's like, here is a context where it's recommended that you do a little bit of self-evaluation. And here's a tool that will allow you to, that this context allows you to play out and then watch yourself respond as you're playing it out and go, oh, maybe I am being too hard on myself. Maybe I should stop. Or maybe I am being a perfectionist. Maybe I should do something about it. Maybe I am kind of evidencing overly harsh standards, or maybe I am being a bit withering, right? Or grumpy, or maybe I'm not owning things at all. Maybe I'm completely avoiding this part of myself. And now I have zero job satisfaction because I'm not accountable. I'm not working with integrity. I have no sense of excellence. So this is a great context to do some of that self-evaluation and then play it out in a practical way. So on the plus side, you get the wisdom of that. But there's also the fact that it expands your perspective. It brings in a function that you actually have some natural talent with. Again, it's the same function as your second function. It's just pointed a different direction. When a function is pointed a different direction, it has, like you mentioned, a different attitude. You still have access to that function. You just don't like using it that way. It doesn't feel as natural as the other way. So it's not like you don't have a capacity for this. In fact, again, you have a talent for it in the same way that you have a talent for your second function. You just don't like it as much. It's just not as fun. It's not as interesting. And so you haven't clocked as much time doing it in that way. But if you just allow yourself to build some skill there, you've now expanded your cognitive tool set by quite a bit. So it gives you different perspectives. It gives you different capacity for problem solving. It might make you more creative. It gives you an ability to bring in a bit of your shadow, which expands your wisdom. There's like it's hard to overstate the benefits that come from doing some of this work.
Yeah. Anything else as far as qualitative nature of this you want to mention?
No, I think that's good. I mean, I think I hope hopefully we sold it.
Yeah.
Do this work because it's good for you. And your six functions already showing up for you all the time in a way that you're not aware of. And that might actually be undermining you. So put a little attention there and you might get a bunch of reward.
Yeah, this is something we do a lot of work with in our Personality Life Path Mentorship program. That is our shadow work program. Really. Right. We go through all 8 functions, no matter where they are for you in your cognitive function stacks. And we look at each week, we look at the quality of each one. We give people exercises to go and try it out and test it in the actual world, and then come back and report your findings.
Do a bit of an audit.
Yeah. And then by the end, we have a 3 or 4 day live event where we tie it all together. We can do it in person or virtually. And it's really great because when people get to that live event, they've already done so much work, like journaling and writing down the qualitative relationship to all of these functions and the archetypical energies within themselves. We connect it with a systems map. So I can't recommend more the PLP, Personality Life Mentorship, Personality Life Path Mentorship.
Yeah.
Incredible program. It's a little bit further down the road, like as far as more advanced material. Like it's a big commitment. It's a lot, but it does dive into your shadow. So if you're interested in 6 function, it's the best thing we have for working with the 6 function.
And it's amazing for people who are going through a life change.
That's right.
Or in transition.
Yeah, and I don't think everyone's ready for it. In fact, I would say most people aren't ready for it. The groups are small because you have to be prepared to be able to enter that space. If we're offering it at the time you're listening to this, I recommend learning more about it because you might be ready for it. But If you're just starting out, another place to start is with the owner's manual. Personality Hacker has owner's manuals for all 16 personality types. So we have one for your type. And this is a really great place. It just focuses for now. We may add more to it over time, but right now we just focus on the first 4 functions, ego, syntonic. And we talk about your relationship to those, how you can grow and all of those. And we dip a little bit, we talk sometimes in the shadow and all that. We really focus on those. And then if you want to do shadow work, it's PLP. But I would say start with an owner's manual, especially if you're just brand new to this concept or these concepts and you're like, I'm still working on just understanding my personality type, Joel and Antonia. You're talking about 6 functions and shadowy, murky, ego dystonic material and which Senex energy. This sounds so beyond where I'm at. That's okay. Not everybody's ready for that. Again, those are 2 places where you can find access points to get started. And while you're over at personalityhacker.com, because that's where you're going to have to go to get the owner's manual or look at more PLP information, make a comment or ask a question, or more importantly, share your story below this podcast. I'd like to hear, and Antonia would love to hear too, what's coming up for you as you're listening along. What are you experiencing in yourself? What is surfacing for you? What are you aware of now, or what are you not aware of? That's the other thing too, is what are you missing around this? Ask some questions. Let's get a dialogue and discussion started around this topic. And then in the next couple episodes, we're going to actually apply this to all the specific personality types as well.
Yep. So, go get a owner's manual. This is my cue, right? Yeah. We're wrapping up. Okay, so
if you enjoyed this episode,
yeah, that's right. That's the thing I was supposed to say.
You can go over and leave a rating or a review on Apple Podcasts.
I guess I was spacing out. Okay, all right. You queued me up. All right. And if you enjoyed this episode, you can subscribe to us on a whole bunch of different, a whole bunch of different platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. And then if you leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, we've had multiples over the last month. Ooh. It's been fabulous. Thank you so much. She runs in the room.
Oh my goodness. I know somebody else wrote one of the
I get so excited.
She jumps up and down and she runs around the house like a little kid. It's amazing.
Okay, it's not quite that much, but
that's how I interpret it.
I do get pretty happy.
She's giddy.
Because it kind of feels like I'm talking to a microphone, I'm looking at you, but I look at you all the time. And so it's like, is this a thing? Is anybody listening? And then when you get ratings and reviews, the review is the important thing. I'm like, oh, look, people are actually listening. So that's awesome. Because the abstraction of numbers, I'm not extroverted thinking, right? I should be doing
the raw likes.
I should be doing more of it for my 6th function, and I am, and I'll talk about how in a future episode. But it really doesn't mean anything to me, like the metrics. But when somebody actually makes a comment, it's like, okay, I can keep doing this. I can keep going. I mean, it's 10 years plus, but I think I got another a couple of years.
Got another week in you?
That's right. I got another week in me. I can do that. So thank you very much for everybody who's left a review. I really appreciate it. Yeah. And you can also watch our video podcast on YouTube, which you might be doing right now. And if you've done so and you've enjoyed this episode, you can subscribe and hit the bell for future episodes coming out.
Yeah. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
We'll talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.